Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. This evening, we have a very special guest. We have Reverend Sharpton, one of the most prominent civil rights leaders in the United States. He's had a long and interesting career doing lots of interesting things that we'll be talking about today. And currently, he's kind of a really prominent guy in the Democratic nomination process. Reverend.
Thank you.
So the way this event is going to work is we're going to do a little back and forth informal interview, and then we'll give it to you to do questions on the floor. So if you have a clever idea, keep it saved up. So, Reverend, you've had a very long career in civil rights activism, and one of the things that we've noticed in recent years with like Black Lives Matter is that kind of heavy use of social media shaping the movement. Do you think, how has that affected your civil rights activism?
I think that it has been helpful. The fact is, I started very young. I became youth director of the SCLC, Operation Breadbasket, which Martin Luther King started when I was 13 years old. The year he died, ironically, the year he was killed, I ironically had become youth director of the New York branch, and I was just entering my teens. We had to go out and give out flyers, mobilize people, and get messaging out in a very hand-to-hand kind of way. And we were interpreted by the media only. We could not get our messages out other than through the prism of the media, which was in many ways very much owned by the forces that sometimes we were fighting. Social media gave us the ability to communicate more en masse and to get counter messages out. And in fact, now many of the news institutions have to kind of watch social media to be corrected. The last 8 years, I do a national cable television show, so I know kind of how the other side works, even though my activism has not stopped. And so I think it is good. Where it has not been good is those that are only active in social media and don't engage with the people that they're organizing, and you don't, therefore, you have the inability to make real change if you're only limited to social media. So you can drive a point, but you have to be able to drive people to actually engage in a system to replace people that should be out of office, or to really bring institutions into a corrective mode.
Interesting. And so obviously, like, President Trump has been a prolific user of social media to get his message out. So do you think that outweighs the benefits of social media for activists?
I think that what President Trump has been able to do is misuse social media effectively, because he has been able to build up a huge social media following that believes whatever he says, and it's usually wrong what he says. He has been able to master with very quick and arresting words the epitome of lies that people listen to. The danger is that if you only follow on social media who you already agree with, you don't get counter views. So Trump will say something, and the people that support and like Trump will consider that the end of the discussion. And I think that he's been able to do that, and others have been able to do that with social media, that those that have opposed have not built up the same numbers. And I think that that's the danger of the misuse of social media and media, period.
So do you think that progressives are doing enough to like counteract those messages on social media? Do you think they're kind of gaining the skills?
I think that progressives have, you've got too many that are purist, and the more purist you are, the more ineffective you become. What I mean by that is that we spend more time arguing about who is the most progressive than we are on who is the most productive toward moving society progressive. So we will argue about the fine line or the fine tuning of a certain ideological point or tactic, rather than dealing with the broad message of how we deal with a given situation. So, for example, 6 years ago, I get a call from an attorney named Benjamin Crump, who I knew in Florida from, I worked with him on a police brutality case. He told me a young man had been killed by a wannabe police guy in Florida, and that he would like National Action Network, which is the organization I lead, to help bring it to national attention and use my television and radio show. I said, tell me about it. He told me about it. It was the story of Trayvon Martin. I had not heard of Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin had already been killed, funeralized, and buried. He brought the parents to New York. When I heard the story of George Zimmerman and Trayvon, I was outraged. Immediately, we called for a big rally because I said, you've got to dramatize this. We got on it. We put 10,000 people in the streets. His mother wrote all this in a book. And it became a national story and a national concern. They had announced in Florida, Sanford, Florida, that they were not even going to arrest Zimmerman, which meant that they had determined in advance that Zimmerman had done nothing wrong. Stand your ground laws. You had the right, if you say I'm threatened, to use deadly force, which was absolutely absurd to us. How are you going to say, based on somebody's perception, possibly imagination, that they have the right to kill somebody, unarmed, in the Trayvon Martin case? So we went down, rallied, started with a rally with 10,000, then kept going, because the only form of activism that is going to be effective is you must continue with sustained activism. You can't hold one march, one rally, one press conference, go home, congratulate yourself, and feel you've done something. You've got to stay on it. We stayed on it, finally forced Zimmerman's arrest. He would have never been arrested without that pressure. And the result was a jury let Zimmerman go. That's where Alicia and the three sisters started the slogan Black Lives Matter as a result of that. And it grew as we saw what happened later. Eric Garner case that we are intimately involved in, including right now, and then Michael Brown and Ferguson, and on and on. So I think that the reality is that as we got in these cases, a lot of the argument was, well, we don't believe in this, we don't believe in nonviolence, we believe in self-defense. We don't believe in church leadership, we believe in this. And all of that is good to debate as long as we're going to come out and deal with the murder of Trayvon Martin or the police killing of Michael Brown and Ferguson. And I think progressives spend too much energy taking shots at each other than fighting the enemy. The right wing, some of them believe in one way or another way, but they come together to stop us. And I think we have to have the maturity to do the same on the other side.
So thinking in kind of a narrow, kind of short-term political sense, do you think that Democrats need to unite behind the frontrunner early in the primaries, or should people wait and see what happens?
Well, I think you've got to first define what the frontrunner is. I think that if polling determines a runner, that's dangerous. Because, one, the polling could be wrong. Second, I think that you cannot predetermine who has support just on any given moment. I just had National Action Network's national convention 3 weeks ago, and all but two of the candidates came to address us because we wanted to hear what they had to say and question them. And I questioned them on everything from reparations to police conduct to what they would do about climate change. And I think that you've got to give people the ability to hear everybody and to determine what they have to say on issues of your concern. One of the things that was very disturbing to me is after the 2016 election, there became this big item in the media that let's stop identity politics, that we'd all be, one thing. Well, I think that was scary because if I have to lose my identity, then my concerns and my specific needs are not addressed. I think that we need to maintain our identities and then have a big tent where everybody's identity and everybody's experience and everybody's disadvantage and everybody that has not been treated in a fair and equal way can be addressed. Out of that, you get a front runner that can put all that together. So like yesterday, before I flew to London, I had lunch in Harlem with Pete Buttigieg. And one of the reasons that I met with him, and I'm meeting with all of them singularly now that our convention is over, is because there was this homophobic rant by Reverend Franklin Graham that denied the religious beliefs based on him being openly gay. And I thought that was appalling. There has been homophobia in the black community. So I wanted to openly have lunch with him in the middle of Harlem to say I think that was wrong. I don't know if that I'm going to endorse him, but I think he has a lot to say and that he should be heard and he has the right to run. So I think that if we cannot open the Democratic Party up to openly deal with everything from LGBTQ to blacks to women to others as who they are, not that we all going to be one thing, you know, that identity politics is wrong and let's all join hands and sing Kumbaya. We cannot expand the electorate, and we are no better than those that we oppose.
Understand. So returning to the 2016 election, do you think that Hillary Clinton failed to reach out to the left-behind working class voters in kind of the upper Midwest? Do you think there's a mistake on her part? Or
I think that she did not reach out as much as she could have, and a lot of that was her team. A lot of her team, because I talked to them, I and Ms. Clinton knew each other for many years. I did not always agree with her husband. I marched against him on the 94 crime bill because I felt it would lead to mass incarceration, and it did. I marched on him on the welfare reform bill. So they were more centrist to right Democrats. And I think that her team felt that it could take a lot for granted, that no one was going to vote for this guy, Donald Trump. And Donald Trump had an electoral college strategy, and they won. And I think that if you look at 3 decisive states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, she lost them all narrowly, even though nationally she received 2.8 million more votes than Trump did. But because of the Electoral College, which in and of itself ought to be eliminated because it was set up to make sure that the South and other smaller states were not given less weight than the other states, and that they therefore counted slaves, my people, as 3/5 of a man. That's where that came from. We are the Electoral College comes from the remnants of post-slavery days, should be eliminated, but it's still there. And they, of course, are stacked in a way that he was able to win. If she had went into Michigan more and Pennsylvania more, never went to Wisconsin, I think that that would have even made her victorious. I know 3 churches in Detroit that could have got her the vote she lost Michigan by. They never engaged them. And I think that a lot of the Democratic establishment, as we call it, take black voters for granted.
And I'm going back to what you said about the crime bill in the 90s. So something that's come up a lot in the primaries is kind of previous candidates' previous support for kind of mass incarceration, so Kamala Harris, Joe Biden. Do you think that record ought to be weighed against them?
I think it ought to be discussed. But let's be clear, Bernie Sanders voted for that crime bill. I think that in the context of that time, a basketball star named Len Bias died of crack cocaine. People started reacting, we have to do something to get rid of crack. I was fighting crack. We were marching in our communities saying that the police know where the crack sellers are, and they won't stop them. And I would go and paint red X's where they were selling crack. But that does not mean that you therefore say, we're going to have mandatory sentencing for crack sellers, 5 to 10 years or more, but not mandatory time for those selling loose cocaine. Well, you can't even make crack without loose cocaine. So you're over incarcerating the guy at the end of the trade and not dealing with the guy that is really making the money. So we've got people that done 20, 30 years on that bill. That was my point, and that was our opposition. We were condemned by many black officials saying, no, we've got to do this, members of the Congressional Black Caucus. So in that context, Clinton, Biden, and others did what they did, and we said it was wrong. We ended up, over time, being proven to be right, but it's not a question of being right. Imagine people that lost half their lives in jail over a crack vial. And I think that, yes, it needs to be raised, but raised in the context so people can evolve, people can see the error of their ways, but they need to say that. Joe Biden spoke at our Martin Luther King holiday breakfast in January, and for the first time said publicly at National Action Network breakfast that he sees where that was wrong. I think he needs to deal with Anita Hill says that was wrong. Now, people need to then weigh whether they feel he was being sincere or not, but it first has to be acknowledged. You cannot pardon someone that doesn't ask for a pardon and say that I erred.
So on that point, in terms of kind of payment for past wrongs, reparations has been a big thing that's kind of unexpectedly come up in this primary cycle.
I thank you for timing my coming and waiting to put it on the front page the day I came. I appreciate that.
Well, speaking of, there's been a recent inquiry at this university about the university's past connections to the slave trade. Do you think that inquiry is something that should be done in 2019?
It should have been done years before. If you have an institutional inequality built on oppression and slavery and the profits and benefits from it, how do you hold yourself up as a historic and superior institution and not acknowledge where some of the resources come from and deal with how you remedy that? When I talk to students in America about reparations, people say, well, why should I pay for what my forefathers did? And I said, because I'm paying for what mine didn't do. They couldn't go to school. They couldn't have access to capital to have an economic underpinning. They couldn't even vote. So I'm supposed to pay for the disadvantage, but you're not supposed to compensate for the advantage. If you start in a rigged race with a rigged advantage of 300 feet, and I'm back here because it's rigged, you can get to the goal line and say, yeah, but I didn't start the race, I picked up the relay halfway down, but you picked up the advantage. And unless we're able to deal with that advantage gap, then how do we ever make society fair and equal?
Interesting.